At 19, she was forced to marry an Apache, but his wedding gift silenced the whole town. At 19, Eliza Harper had already learned what it felt like to be looked at without being seen, judged without being heard, and traded without being asked, and on the morning the church bell rang for her wedding, the sound felt less like a celebration and more like a verdict echoing across the dusty frontier town of Red Hollow, where whispers traveled faster than truth and mercy was often buried beneath fear. The townsfolk gathered early, not out of love, but curiosity, lining the wooden sidewalks with narrowed eyes and folded arms, eager to witness what they called a disgrace and what Eliza knew was survival. Her father stood stiff beside her, jaw clenched, hat pulled low, a man broken by debt and drought, convinced that marrying his daughter to an Apache man named Nantan was the only way to protect what little land they had left from bloodshed and retaliation. No one asked Eliza what she wanted. No one asked if she was afraid. And she was, terrified, not of Nantan, whom she had only seen from a distance, tall and quiet with eyes that held storms and silence together, but of the stories the town had fed her since childhood, stories soaked in hatred and ignorance, painting Apache men as monsters rather than human beings. As she stepped into the church, her hands trembling beneath borrowed lace, the murmurs grew louder, words like curse, savage, and shame slipping through the pews like poison, and Eliza felt her chest tighten, wondering if this was how a life ended, not with death, but with surrender. Then he entered. Nantan did not storm in or bow his head. He walked slowly, deliberately, dressed not in ceremony but in dignity, wearing clean buckskin and a silver medallion that caught the light, his posture calm, his presence commanding without force. The church fell strangely quiet, not from respect, but confusion, as if the town didn't know how to react to a man who refused to behave like their nightmares. When his eyes met Eliza's, there was no ownership in them, no triumph, only something unexpected, understanding. The vows were spoken quickly, awkwardly, the preacher eager to be done, and when Eliza said, "I do," it felt less like consent and more like a leap into darkness. But as the final words were spoken and the room exhaled in relief, Nantan raised his hand gently, signaling for a pause. He turned not to Eliza, but to the town, his voice calm yet carrying weight, and said that before he left with his wife, he had a wedding gift to present, not just for her, but for everyone who had gathered to judge without knowing. A murmur rippled through the crowd as he reached into a leather satchel, and Eliza held her breath, unaware that everything she believed about fear, honor, and power was about to change forever. The moment Nantan opened the satchel, time itself seemed to slow, and when he laid its contents upon the church table, the room froze, not in shock, but in recognition, because what he revealed were land deeds, official papers bearing the seals of banks and rail companies, documents proving that the very land Red Hollow stood on had once been taken illegally, not from settlers, but from Apache families who had honored treaties the government later ignored. Gasps spread through the pews as Nantan spoke, explaining that his people had not come for revenge, but restitution, and that through years of negotiation, trade, and sacrifice, he had reclaimed what was stolen, not with violence, but with patience and wisdom the town never believed his people possessed. Then he did something no one expected. He handed the deeds to the town council, announcing that the land would remain with the settlers, freely given, so long as peace was honored and respect upheld, because his marriage to Eliza was not a transaction of fear, but a bridge between two wounded worlds. The silence that followed was heavy, crushing, as faces once filled with arrogance now stared at the floor, stripped of superiority and left only with shame. Eliza felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from sadness, but relief, as she realized she had not been sold to a monster, but joined to a man of quiet strength and deep honor. Outside, the town stood frozen as Nantan helped Eliza onto the horse, not ahead of him, but beside him, where equals ride. Over time, Red Hollow changed. Children learned new stories. Old men lowered their eyes in apology. And Eliza, once a frightened girl forced into a future she didn't choose, became a woman who chose to stand, speak, and heal alongside a husband who never raised his voice, never demanded obedience, and never needed approval to prove his worth. And years later, when travelers asked how peace came to Red Hollow, the answer was never about guns or fear, but about a wedding gift that revealed the truth, silenced hatred, and proved that dignity is the strongest power of all. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that strength doesn't always shout and kindness can change history, then subscribe to this channel, because here we tell stories that don't just entertain, but awaken the heart.